with these fans. Whew. Timmy, you good? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Center by the stool. Thank you. All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If I could have you set your cell phones to silent or turn them off entirely, that'd be great. I'm going to start off with welcoming everybody here, especially Governor Christie. Chris Christie was sworn in as the governor of New Jersey on January 19, 2010, and won his second term on November 5, 2013. Under Governor Chris Christie, New Jersey has taken the biggest and toughest challenges with real solutions and bipartisan cooperation. He's implemented an aggressive reform agenda to restore fiscal integrity, accountability to state and local government. Lowered New Jersey's property taxes, reformed the state's pension and health benefit system, and improved public education to ensure every child has an access to quality education. A lifelong New Jerseyan, Governor Christie has a deep affection for and strong commitment to the state in which he has spent his entire life. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Governor Chris Christie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you for your patience this morning. I got held up with the Lieutenant Governor at the farmers market in Des Moines. A lot of people wanting pictures, and that's a good thing. You know, whenever I go out to dinner back at home with the family, people come up to the table and they want pictures. My kids start to get impatient. I say to them, remember something, kids, in my business, when people stop asking for pictures, it's a bad sign. So thank you for your patience this morning. I appreciate it very, very much. Thank you for your time on a Saturday morning. I appreciate it. People ask me all the time now, as I travel around the country and I go back to New Jersey, my friends in New Jersey say, so what's it like? What's it like to campaign for president in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina? And I say to them, the most amazing thing is how engaged all of you are in this process in July of 2015. And I will tell you that for folks who are cynical about our political process, and there's lots of reasons to be cynical at times about the political process, I tell them they should come here and come to New Hampshire and come to South Carolina to see all of you. Because here you are this morning on a Saturday morning taking your time to come and listen to me and ask me questions 8 months before anybody's going to be voting on anything. And that's incredibly heartening for me, and it gives me great confidence in our country and our country's future, because we do care. We do care about our government. We do care about how we're going to represent ourselves to the rest of the world, and we do care about the future of our children and our grandchildren and what it's going to mean to have this next election go the right way. So I'm going to talk about two things quickly off the top, then I want to leave the rest of the time for you to ask me questions about whatever's on your mind. First thing is, in a presidency that has been extraordinarily disappointing for the American people, what this president has done in the last 10 days, in my opinion, is the worst thing that he's done in a disappointing presidency. This agreement with Iran is going to make America more vulnerable and less safe, and it's going to make the world a less safe place. I mean, think about this. The leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world is now on a glide path to a nuclear weapon. And this president is doing so willingly. But the worst part of it, you go through the parts of the agreement that are bad, right? You know, that he's going to lift the conventional arms embargo against Iran in 5 years, that he's going to lift the ban and the embargo on technology for ballistic missiles in 8 years. And the fact that, you know, this agreement is going to give Iran about $150 billion in cash. And believe me, everybody, they're not building highways with that. They're going to give it to Hezbollah. They're going to give it to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. They're going to do it to create all types of tumult around the world. But the worst part of this is, I've had my disagreements with the president. I've worked with him when I needed to. But the fact is, we only have one president at a time. And the worst part of this is that the President of the United States last Tuesday looked us in the eye and lied. He lied to us. Got on national television with the Vice President and he said, we don't have to count on trusting Iran in this agreement. This agreement's based on verification. And he said, anytime, anywhere, you'll remember if you watch, he said, anytime, anywhere, we can verify whether the Iranians are complying with this agreement. It's a lie. Here's how the process works. We want to inspect someplace because we think they're cheating. We make the request. The Iranians can say no. Then when they say no, it goes to an arbitration panel where Iran has a vote. Then the arbitration panel has 24 days to decide whether or not we can have access to the site where we think they're cheating. Listen, I'm a former prosecutor. I was a U.S. attorney in New Jersey for 7 years under President Bush 43. And that's like me going and getting a search warrant because I think criminal activity is going on by someone getting a search warrant for their house. I go in the house, I knock on the door, I say, I have a search warrant to search your home for evidence of criminal activity, and I'll be back in 24 days to see if there's any evidence of that activity. Now listen, even the stupidest criminal in New Jersey is going to get that stuff out of there in the next 24 days, right? And we pride ourselves on having some of the stupidest criminals in America. But even so, even those criminals, they're going to get that evidence out of there. And the Iranians are not stupid. But the president knows if he told us the truth, that we'd say, Mr. President, go back and negotiate a better deal. We're not accepting this one. And he wants this deal. See, this president sees something in the Iranians that none of us see. Many, if not most of you in this audience, remember 1979. You remember the Iranians taking our hostages at the embassy. You remember them burning our flag. You remember them screaming death to America. And by the way, in 36 years since, they haven't changed one bit. Only this president thinks they've changed. The supreme leader, the Ayatollah, just said a couple of days ago, nothing about this agreement will change our attitude towards the United States or our relationship with the United States. Yet this president wants to sign this agreement. Makes no sense. It's dangerous. And if you're Israel right now, when Iran has said that their goal is to blow you off the map, how would you feel about the United States willingly giving that person, that country, a nuclear weapon? So this is really important, everybody. It's really important. And here's the thing. People now say, now the Democrats who are desperate to try to save this deal are now saying, well, the Republicans are criticizing it. What would they do? Well, first of all, it's not our obligation. It's the president's. But I'll answer their challenge. Here's what I would have done. I would have done exactly what Ronald Reagan did in Reykjavik in the mid-1980s when he met with Mikhail Gorbachev to negotiate an arms agreement. He thought that agreement that Gorbachev was offering was not good and not in the interest of the United States. And so what did Ronald Reagan do? He got up and he walked out. And he got a lot of criticism from some quarters, from the media and other places, that he walked away from an agreement. But Ronald Reagan knew that no deal is better than a bad deal. And what happened after he walked out? A year later, the Soviets came back and they agreed to a better deal for the United States that Reagan was willing to sign. If I were Barack Obama, if I were the President of the United States right now, I would get up and walk away from the table and say to the Iranians, here's the deal. When you're serious about negotiating a fair agreement for everyone, you have my number. Until that time, we're going to ratchet up the sanctions and make it hurt. Because we don't want you to have a nuclear weapon. Second thing I want to talk to you about really quickly is entitlement reform. This is the way I started off this national conversation, was on entitlement reform. And here's why. Believe me, political advisors from all over the place told me, do not talk about entitlement reform. It is the third rail of American politics. If you touch it, you die. Well, I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to hug it. And here's why we got to do that. Right now, 71% of federal spending is spent on entitlements and debt service. 71% of every dollar we spend is on entitlements and debt service. You know what it was when John Kennedy became president 55 years ago? 26%. Now, we need to deal with this for two reasons. One, because these programs are going insolvent. The Social Security Administration says it'll be insolvent in 15 years. But there's been a Harvard and Dartmouth study that was just done that says it's really more like 7 to 8 years. Why the difference? Harvard and Dartmouth says that the government, you'll be shocked to hear this, has made two major mistakes. They've overestimated fertility and underestimated life expectancy. It's a bad combination for Social Security. Think you're going to have more people than you're really going to have paying in, and you're going to have taking the money out of the system now, living longer than we expect. Now here's the reality of all this, everybody. The average life expectancy for a woman now is 83 years old in America. The average life expectancy for a man is 79. I see some of you women smiling. Just remember something, 10 years ago that gap was 6 years. Now it's 4. We're gaining on you. And you were expecting to have 4 years off from us at the end of your life. You may not get it. You may be stuck with us the entire time. But these programs were developed. They were developed when people lived to their 60s. So we're living 15 to 20 years longer than these programs expected us to live. That's a great thing. It's a blessing. And the quality of our life is better. But we need to change these programs to make it better, to make it work, so they don't go insolvent. The second reason is, if we don't change these programs, by 2030, every nickel that we raise in taxes today will be spent on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the debt. Every nickel. That means the only alternative then to continue to run the rest of the government are massive tax increases on the American people. That's not good for our society. That's not good for our future of our economy. It's not good for our children and grandchildren. So I've said we got to deal with this problem. Go to my website, go to chrischristie.com. It's got a 12-point detailed plan on this that I want you to read, and it's been scored. And it shows how much it will save and how we'll do it. But good news is, this morning with these fans going, I'm not going to go over all 12 points for you. Congratulations. Feel relieved. I'm only going to do 2 because they apply to Social Security and Medicare. First one is we need to raise the retirement age. To acknowledge our longer lifespan, we need to raise the retirement age. I want to raise it 2 years and phase that in over the next 25 years. That means every year we raise the retirement age 1 month for 25 years. So listen to that, okay? Because when the Democrats, when Hillary Clinton tells you, I'm throwing grandma off the cliff, that's a very high cliff if it takes 25 years to get to the bottom. It means gravity has stopped operating the way it's normally supposed to. It means that I'll be 79 years old. Life expectancy now for a man when these are fully phased in. So it's gradual, and it doesn't affect anyone who's on Social Security now or about to come on Social Security. It affects those people much longer away, and then we have time to plan for it and know when our retirement age will be. Second is we need to means test Social Security. And let me be specific about what I mean by that. If you have $5 million in liquid assets, not your home, liquid assets that are invested, that generate for you $200,000 in retirement income a year or more. So you've stopped working and your investments alone generate $200,000 in income for you a year. Do you really need a Social Security check? Do you really need that check every month? I would tell you I don't think so. See, Social Security was developed to make sure that people who worked hard and paid into the system did not grow old in poverty. Didn't have to choose between heat and rent and food. Well, if you're getting $200,000 in retirement income a year, you're not choosing between heat and rent and food. You've done well. Congratulations. And this country has given you the opportunity to do well. And we need to make these programs solvent for the people who really need them, who would have to choose between heat, rent, and food. And if you don't want to do that, if everybody says, hey, I paid in, I want my check. Well, I'd remind you that there's plenty of things you pay for that you don't get a check back for. We all buy homeowners insurance, right? And that homeowners insurance is there in case our house burns down. We can rebuild it. You own your house for 30 years. Your kids are grown. You decide you want a smaller place. You go to sell it. Do you go to the closing and invite the insurance company and say, by the way, I've never made a claim. My house didn't burn down. Can I have my money back? after the insurance company gets done laughing, what they'll say to you is, what you got for the last 30 years was the security of knowing that if something did happen, we were going to be there to pay to replace it. That's what Social Security needs to become in this country. And we need to move our way towards that, because if we don't, we are talking about massive tax increases on the American people, which is bad for an economy that already is moving much too slow to create opportunity for my children and your children. And so we need to have this conversation. Same thing about Medicare. Increase eligibility 2 years, phase it in over 25. And if you have over $200,000 a year or more in retirement income from those assets, well then, instead of subsidizing Medicare premium 75%, which is what we do now, let's subsidize it only 10%. Still get a subsidy, but much less, and we'll save tens of billions of dollars a year. If you have the money to pay for your health care, you should. It makes sense, not only for you, but for the next generation as well. Now, there are going to be some people who are going to tell you we shouldn't do anything. You know, when I put out my plan, Governor Huckabee said, if this gets passed, Governor Christie will be ratifying lying and stealing by the government. Let me inform Governor Huckabee of something, and all of you. Something you already know. The lying and stealing has already occurred. You know, remember the lockbox Al Gore talked about, 2000? I've seen the lockbox. There's nothing in it. It's a stack of IOUs. They're spending the money on the payroll tax now on other things, and they're giving us IOUs. The horse has left the barn, everybody. The lying and stealing has occurred. Now, are we going to be the generation who's going to step up and fix it? Or are we going to ignore it and let our children have to deal with it when it's a much bigger, deeper, harder problem to solve? I'm not talking about this because it's politically advantageous. I'm talking about it because this is what leadership looks like. It's taking on the hard problems and being honest with the American people. And by the way, everybody in this room, in your heart, you know this is true. You know it's true. You may not want to think about it, but when you do, you know it's true. So let's have the conversation together and let's deal with it like adults. I think if we do that, we're leaving a great legacy for our children, and we're preserving these programs for the people right now who are depending upon them. So there's lots of other stuff we talked about. I urge you to go to the website. We have been more specific in this campaign than any of the other 15 candidates on entitlement reform, on tax and regulatory reform, on the role of the nation's military and the national intelligence community, on education reform, and on criminal justice reform. We have detailed proposals on all those, and let me tell you why. Because 7 years ago, a majority of people in this country voted for a bumper sticker. They voted for hope and change. And they had no idea what hope and change really meant. Now they know. And so this time we're going to be smarter. We're going to be smarter this time. We're going to say, you know what? You know what hope and change meant? It meant we bought a bill of goods from somebody who is taking this country in the wrong direction. This time, we want to know what we're buying. We want to know what the next president is going to do. And I want to be the kind of president who, after I'm elected in November of 2016 and I take the oath of office in January, that when I try to do something, no one can say, hey, wait a second. You didn't tell us about that. I'm telling you about all of it. So when we try to do it, you'll know this is what the people voted for. And we can't take a chance again. We got to be able to bet on a horse that we know can cross the finish line and get things done. And that's what I've done in New Jersey. It's what I'll do as president. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to let you ask me questions. There's only one rule. You raise your hand. You ask the question. I answer it. You don't have to fill out a card on the way in and write down your question and have my staff read them and then say, let's see, which one of these does he like to answer? Every one you ask, there are only about maybe 10 or 12 people in this room that I know, that I've met before. I'll try not to call on them. I'll call on the ones I've never met before. And you ask me whatever it is you want, and I'm happy to answer it. So, yes, sir.
Governor Christie, on energy, you've stated your support for the renewable fuel standard, specifically citing that it creates market access for alternatives to the heavily subsidized petroleum industry and gives consumers more choices at the pump, cheaper, cleaner, renewable choices. And you've said that you will enforce it if it's on the books. Now, we have great support for this policy from our delegation here in Iowa, but around the country there are other congressmen who are trying to get this policy off the books. So my question for you, as president, what will you ask of Congress on this issue? Will you encourage them to keep the RFS in place as is until 2022 and beyond?
Yes, I will, and here's why. It's law in the books and it makes sense. And I will talk about it to Congress in the context of an entire energy policy that says we need to explore for more oil and we need to explore for more natural gas as well. We have 100 years of natural gas supply underneath this country. We need to go and get it. And we need to get the oil supply. And we need to work on renewables. Listen, in New Jersey, we've shown that this can be done. We don't do cap and trade in New Jersey like every other northeastern state. It belongs to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's a cap and trade program. We pulled out of it when I became governor because I'm not for taxing the American people or the people of New Jersey on energy in that way. It makes no sense. But what have we done? They said you can't get clean air unless you do cap and trade. Well, New Jersey's already met our clean air goals for 2020. It's 2015. We've already met our goals. How did we do it? 53% of New Jersey's electricity is generated by nuclear power. We should get back to using nuclear power in this country again. Secondly, New Jersey is the third largest producer of solar energy in America, behind California and Arizona. Would you imagine that, New Jersey? But we made a commitment. We worked with the private sector. We've got solar energy as part of our portfolio. And now we're building 3 new natural gas-fired electricity generating plants in our state that also lowers our carbon footprint. My point to Congress would be, one, we have to make sure that we invest in all the things that make sense. Secondly, we've got to make sure that we work with Canada and Mexico. They're in energy revolutions themselves. If we work with Canada and Mexico, North America will be the energy continent, not the Middle East. Imagine how different that'll change politics in the world. If the Western Europeans can come to America and Canada and Mexico for their energy. And I will talk about the renewable fuel standards right in that context. That's what we need to do. We need to be investing in all of these things to make sure that Americans have a broad range of abundant choices. Because that will also drive down the cost of energy, and that's good for our developing manufacturing jobs in this country. So we want to bring manufacturing back to this country. There's only 2 cost items that really matter, labor cost and energy costs. We don't want our labor costs to be like China. We want our people to make a living who work in our manufacturing plants. But we can drive our energy costs way below China, make ourselves more competitive here in the United States. Renewable fuel standards are all part of that. And what I would say to Congress is, it's on the books, and I don't have to ask them for permission to enforce it. The executive branch enforces those laws, and they're not doing it right now. So no new permission is necessary. You need a president of the United States who actually knows how to run something. And we will do that, and we'll do it as the renewable fuel standard and a lot of other things that this administration has neglected to do that they should be doing. And you have my word on that. I came to the Ag Summit in March. I made it very clear, and you'll check on something. I don't say anything different in New Hampshire than I say in Iowa. I don't go to South Carolina and say, well, we'll study the renewable fuel standard. But when I come to Iowa, you got candidates in this race who say different things at different times. They used to be against the renewable fuel standard. Now they're for the renewable fuel standard. They say in commercials that they were pro-choice. Now they're pro-life. Listen, please, don't buy a bumper sticker again. Don't do it. Make them stand in the center of the room like this and make them answer questions. And if they go to New Hampshire or South Carolina and they say they'll study the renewable fuel standard, or when they were governor, if they say, I'm against the renewable fuel standard, then all of a sudden they show up in Iowa and say they're for it. Ask them. Challenge them. I've been for it, always been for it, still for it now, and will be for it when I'm President of the United States.
Governor, you're one of the few candidates that I've heard that's had the guts to address this entitlement situation. I really respect that. I appreciate you doing it. I wonder if you could expand that a little bit. Talk about economic growth in general. It seems to me we've really raised the cost of economic growth in this country. What would you do to get this thing cooking?
Listen, the president's killed economic growth in this country. This is the worst recovery from a recession since World War II. And here's why. I'll give you a macro reason and then some smaller reasons and what we would do to fix it. The big reason is that this president believes that government should pick the winners and losers. He sets regulations that are so thick and so cumbersome that only the people in Washington, D.C. can figure out whether you're complying or you're not complying, and then they decide if you are, you're a winner, if you're not, you're a loser. And let's talk about regulation. The Small Business Administration. Now, this administration has said that the cost of federal regulation for every small business owner in this country is now $10,000 per employee. Think about that, everybody. That's not taxes. The cost of complying with regulation is $10,000 per employee. It's outrageous. And if you own a small business or work in a small business, you know it's true. And so what we need to do to get economic growth going again are three different things. First, we need to reform the individual tax system in this country. It is only built for the wealthy. It is not built for everyday Americans. All these loopholes and deductions that most people in America don't use because you don't have a lobbyist to get your special loophole or deduction. Here's what we need to do. We need to go to 3 rates, 28% being the highest rate, which is where it was when Ronald Reagan did tax reform in 1986 with a Democratic senator from New Jersey, with Bill Bradley. Rate was at 28%. The lowest rate should be 8%. We should have one rate in between. But in return, for everybody getting lower rates, we got to get rid of all those deductions and loopholes except for 2. Keep the home mortgage interest deduction and keep the charitable contribution deduction. There might be a lot of other deductions that some of you may like. Say goodbye. In return, though, you're getting lower rates. And you know what's going to happen then? You can do your taxes in 15 minutes. Here's what you paid. Deduct your interest. Deduct your charitable contributions. Take that number. Which bracket are you in? Multiply it times that. Write your check and be done. Now, this is the part of my speech that my father hates because he's a retired CPA. It's like, I raised you on the tax, so what are you doing to me? But he's 82 now. He's not working anymore, so he'll be okay. Second, on the business tax side, we have the highest business tax rate in the world, here in America. 35%. We need to get rid of their loopholes and deductions and lower it to 25%. That'll put us in the middle of all the industrialized countries. We don't have to be the lowest because we're America. We offer a lot of other benefits, but we can't be the highest anymore. And we know that American companies who work outside this country as well have $2 trillion in profits that they're not bringing back to the United States because they have to pay taxes on it again. We're one of the few countries, along with North Korea and a few others, that tax it twice. If you pay taxes in Great Britain, for instance, and you want to go to France, you don't have to pay taxes in France again. But if you pay taxes in Great Britain and you're an American company, you want to bring the money back here, you got to pay taxes again. So what are they doing? They're keeping their money over there. So I say, let's have a one-time repatriation of that money to be invested in American jobs back over here, and let them pay 8.75% on it. Because 8.75% of $2 trillion is a heck of a lot more than 35% of zero. And let's let them get it back in here and investing it in creating American jobs, American opportunity. Third, on the regulatory side, I'll tell you what I did as governor of New Jersey. First executive order I signed was executive order number 1 was to freeze any new regulation from any department or agency of state government for 90 days. And then I sent my lieutenant governor out in public forums to meet with small business owners and say, which regulations that have been imposed over the last 4 years have cost you the most money, been the most ridiculous and difficult to comply with? Bring them back. At the end of our first year, we got rid of 1/3 of all the regulations that got put in place the 4 years before. And it's lifted a great burden off of the businesses in New Jersey. If I'm President of the United States, first executive order I'm going to sign is freezing any new regulation by any department or agency of the federal government. And I'm going to ask my people to do 2 things. 1, do the same thing, bring me back these regulations to get rid of. And 2, review every executive order this president has signed for the last 8 years and get a stack on my desk of which ones we need to rescind. And on the first day, I will joyfully sit at the desk in the Oval Office and undo the things that Barack Obama has done to kill this economy in this country. Those are the 3 things we do in the first 100 days. We do that, this economy will start growing again, people will get back to work. Because I'll tell you this, when I graduated from college in 1984, and my wife graduated in 1985, we weren't worried about getting a job. We were worried about which job were we going to take. The economy was growing so well and there was so much opportunity in America. Our son is 21 years old now, entering his senior year at Princeton University. And he is worried about finding a job. And he goes to one of the best universities in the world. He's worried about finding a job. As our kids at Iowa State and University of Iowa and Rutgers University and all over this country. We need to change that. And that's the way I would do it. Yes, sir. Right here.
I'm John Strong, Army veteran from West Des Moines, and I spent some time in the Army and also some time in Fort Dix, New Jersey, so I want to know what you do for veterans. And in the past, any veteran seeking employment could get help from veterans representatives at state employment offices. Now Obama's Department of Labor has a new policy, so old veterans like me are no longer eligible for vet rep services. There's a lot said about veterans, a lot said about people having to work to age 70 and older to save Social Security, but veterans employment services for old veterans has been forgotten. And I also want to mention that Hillary brought Hanoi Jane Fonda to the White House and really crapped on veterans. And I wondered if you would make a promise that if elected president, you would never bring Jane Fonda to the White House like Hillary did.
Give me the name, I just didn't hear the last part.
John Strong.
Listen, I think there are very few things that Hillary Clinton would be willing to do that I would do as president. Very few. And I don't think you'd find much confusion between what a Christie presidency would look like and a Hillary Clinton presidency. But let me talk to you specifically about the issue that you brought up. The fact is, we make lots of promises to veterans when we ask them to serve. And this administration has broken many of those promises. You're talking about employment services, and that's one of them. Health care has been another one. The lies and the deceit that's gone on at our veterans hospitals around this country is disgraceful. And so the first thing I would do is to get a qualified person who has run a major health care system in this country to be Secretary of Veterans Affairs. The VA has become, its majority of its work is a health care provider. We don't need some retired general, with all due respect to the generals or the admirals, to run the VA. We need someone who knows how to meet the mission that our veterans need. And on the labor front, why wouldn't we want to do everything we can to help our veterans be employed? They come back with great experience. And yet we don't give them the type of opportunities that we should be giving them to help grow our economy and to make our businesses in this country, both small and large, better. Last thing is this on vets. I don't believe we can wait for the Veterans Administration to be fixed on the health care issue. So I believe every person who has served should take their veterans card and be able to go to any doctor or any hospital in this country and get their health care wherever it is they want. We should not make them have to go to veterans hospitals. We'll continue to have veterans hospitals because they can provide some very specialized health care to veterans, but veterans should be able to go wherever they want. That's the promise we made to them, and that's the promise that we need to keep. And I will read this. Thank you very much, sir. Yes, sir, right there.
This question is kind of asking it like it is, but state gun right groups from here in Iowa to Minnesota, even to Georgia, have sent out some emails recently saying that you're very anti-gun when it comes to the Second Amendment. So my question is, how are you going to New Jersey gun owners into thinking that you'll be anything other than a President Michael Bloomberg if you become successful?
Well, because it's not true. So let's start with that. Yeah, does New Jersey have a lot of really difficult gun laws? Yeah, and they were all signed before I became governor. I vetoed that. Well, what about Brian Fletcher? I've already pardoned 3 people who were arrested and pardoned 3 of them. And Brian Fletcher's case is under consideration. But you don't make a decision to pardon somebody in 15 minutes. It's an awesome power and authority. And Brian Fletcher's lawyers have been in contact, and my office has been in contact with them. We're interviewing him, and we're reviewing the situation. But I'm not going to make that decision in 15 minutes, nor should I, nor should you want me to. Because with the stroke... It says what? Well, yeah, okay, so good. The NRA has said that that's the way it has to be, and I may wind up pardoning him. But the NRA hasn't interviewed him. The NRA hasn't met with his lawyers. We are, and we're doing that. And listen, I understand you've got a point of view, but your point of view is dead wrong. Go and look at the record. You just raised the .50 caliber rifle as if that was something that I did. I vetoed it. So I don't know where you're getting your information from, but your information is wrong. I vetoed the .50 caliber ban. I also vetoed the law that was passed and sent to my desk to reduce magazine size from 15 to 10. Now, is that somebody who's anti-gun and anti-gun rights who vetoes that as well? I pardoned Stefan Josie Davis. And we have done the things that have been needed to do that. Well, I understand you're shrugging your shoulders, but what are you shrugging your shoulders about? I mean, I understand if you have a point of view, have a point of view, but have some facts to back it up. What are your facts to back up that I'm anti-gun? Oh, no. All right, so now you're interpreting intent. I had to get muscled into it by who? Who's muscled me? Gun owners across my state? Let me tell you something. I've agreed with gun owners across my state on most issues over the course of time. What they're frustrated about is that we have a Democratic legislature who is incredibly anti-gun and that they can't get those laws changed. Well, listen, here's the news for anybody who's governor or president. You're not emperor or dictator. People in my state want to change these laws? Elect a Republican legislature and the laws will be changed. You keep a Democratic legislature, they're going to be the way they are. So the fact is, I have no problem with defending my record against questions from folks like you or anybody else. But what you're obligated to do, with all due respect, is to have a few facts at your disposal and not just an impression that you want to have. Because the impression is wrong and the facts are wrong. And I'm still waiting for one fact from you about me being anti-gun. Give me one. One fact. Got one? By the way, I vetoed the state ID system. You're wrong about that too. Steve Sweeney and the Democrats in the legislature put the bill on my desk to have a broad statewide ID system and a statewide ID card, and I vetoed it. So help me out. Help me out. Because you don't have one fact yet. Not one. And don't talk to me about who I beat in a primary in 2009, and you think he was more pro-gun. Well, let me tell you this. The Republicans in New Jersey picked me, and they picked me by 20 points. So, by the way, that ad was from 1995. And I'll ask you this. If you've not changed your mind once in 20 years, if you haven't changed your mind once in 20 years on any issue, then I'll tell you you're not a thinking, breathing, living human being. So don't talk to me about being anti-gun as governor and raise something to me that was 20 years ago. And if you want to debate me, come in the top 10, run for president, and come to Fox on Cleveland on August 6th, and I'm happy to debate you. But here's what you'll have to do then, and what you failed to do this morning. Come up with one fact. No, you didn't. One fact and one thing I've done as governor of New Jersey that's done anything, not to support the rights of legal gun owners. This is the kind of garbage that people put out who have an agenda. Work for the candidate you want to work for. That's fine by me. But don't come in front of this group of people and lie about my record, which is what you did.
Hi. I was born during the Second World War, and I remember in my block as a kid all the people being drafted and going to war. I have 17 grandkids. A lot of them are right in that age to go. What would you do about it if we send kids over there to the Middle East? Yes or no?
Would I send kids to the Middle East? Depends on the circumstance. First of all, I'm not for a draft, and I don't think we need one, if that's what the question is. I'm not for a draft, and I don't think we need one. I think the volunteer army is working. Volunteer military is working. And there are lots of people who want to volunteer to help to serve our country in that way, and I commend them for it, and I think it's working well. I don't think that any president should stand up, or candidate for president, and say, I will never send troops to X place. It takes an option off the table that weakens your ability to negotiate with adversaries. They need to know that every option is on the table. But I would tell you this. Let's use one example, fighting ISIS in the Middle East. I'm not for sending American troops over there right now to fight ISIS. I think Jordanians, Egyptians, Emiratis, and Saudis should be the ones bringing the fight to ISIS. That we should be arming them with the best weapons we can give them. We should be training them down to the battalion level. We should be providing them with intelligence to allow them to be effective. But I don't believe we need to be sending American troops over to fight ISIS right now. But what I won't say to you today is that I would never do that. Because if I thought that ISIS was a direct and immediate threat to the safety and security of the people of the United States, then I would use force. I don't think it's necessary now, but I might change my mind if circumstances change on the ground and they become a greater direct threat to the United States than I perceive them to be today. But those are, you should not, in my opinion, as Commander-in-Chief, take options off the table. I don't want to send our young men and women into harm's way any more than you do. But as President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief of the military, you better be ready to make decisions that are in the best interest of all Americans for their safety and security. That's the way I would make those decisions if I were president. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Governor Christie, for coming out and talking with us today on a lot of difficult issues. My question is if elected president, what would you do to address lack of opportunity for all due to the growing income and wealth inequality in America?
The income inequality problem in America is real. Middle class has not seen a real increase in wages in 15 years, and this is a major problem for our country. But here's what Hillary Clinton wants to do. She said the way she's going to fix this problem is increase capital gains taxes, give people paid sick leave, and increase the minimum wage. None of those things are going to create jobs and opportunity for our country. Paid sick leave never increased a job or created one. And an increased minimum wage is not going to move anybody into the middle class. Fact is, what we need to do is address the opportunity inequality problem in this country. And what's happened, as I was talking about before, is that we have such low economic growth, 1.5%, 2%, and such staggering regulation that businesses are not creating jobs at the rate that they were before. Do you know we have more business deaths in America now than we have business births? As long as that ratio is upside down, we're not going to be able to deal with the income inequality problem because we won't be able to deal with the opportunity inequality problem. That's why we have to change the tax system for both businesses and individuals, and why we have to lift this yoke of regulation off of people's backs. Can you imagine if we just cut in half the cost of regulation? If every small business in this country had $5,000 more per employee to invest in their business rather than send to Washington, D.C., it would be an explosion of job growth in this country because people would then have the money to invest in their business and to grow jobs. That's what we need to do. There's a fundamental difference between my philosophy and the Democrats. Democrats believe Washington creates jobs. They believe government creates jobs. I believe it's the power of your ideas and the depth of your work ethic. That if you have a great idea, and I met a woman in New Hampshire just about a week and a half ago or so, who was telling me about the fact that she was working for AT&T. She's a computer programmer. She was tired of working for her boss. She didn't like her boss. And she thought she had something to do in terms of web design, some ideas that she thought were good. She quit her job and she started her business in her basement. She went door to door in her local town from business to business to offer her services. So I'm listening to this story and say, well, that's a nice little company she's developed. Well, this nice little company she developed now has over 600 employees and just got sold to a Norwegian company for so much money that she thought it was impolite to tell me how much money she sold her company for. Think about this. She had a great idea and she worked like crazy. And she created opportunity for 600 people who weren't going to get a job in that place if it wasn't for her. And now she's created wealth for her and for those people, all of whom, or most of whom at least, were owners of the company as well. I mean, this is the kind of thing we need to do. And you have someone like that started that small. Think about, I read a story just last day or two about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, that he's now the 9th wealthiest person in the country. He's 31 years old, and he started this thing at 19 years old in his dorm room at Harvard. And now it's one of the wealthiest companies in the world, has almost 1.5 billion members, and it started from a kid in his dorm room who thought he had a great idea and worked hard. To me, that's the way we build opportunity in this country, not with some bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., who are sitting in cubicles filling out forms telling us how we're supposed to be regulated. That's the way we deal with income inequality in this country, is give everybody a lift. Think about the people who are all working at Facebook today. The money they're making, the opportunities they have, and all the businesses that have been spurred off of that by those people. That's what we need, and we need to create that again in our country. We had it in the 1980s. We had it in the 1990s. We haven't had it since. We need to have it again, and through these policies, I think we'll be able to get it. That's the way I do it. All right.
So Obamacare. The Republicans all do a good job about talking about how they would repeal the Affordable Care Act, but I never hear a lot of details about ideas on what they would replace it with or what they would do instead. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
It's incumbent upon us on Obamacare to not only say it should be repealed, which it should, but tell you what we're going to replace it with. Here's what I do. I think that each and every state in this country should be required to come up with their own plan. I don't believe that a health care plan that works in a state like New Jersey, with 8.9 million people in a very small plot of land, the most densely populated state in the country, the most ethnically diverse state in the country, has the same health care challenges that you have here in Iowa. Very different. And think about New Jersey and Iowa look like brother and sister compared to our differences with Wyoming, where I have counties in my state that have more people than the people they have in the entire state of Wyoming, right? So why don't we trust the governors and the state legislatures to do it? They understand the health care challenge in their state much better than anybody in Washington, D.C. does. And just as importantly, you have the opportunity to access your state reps and your state senators when something's going wrong much easier than trying to change something that's happening in Washington, all that distance away from you, not only in terms of miles, but in terms of psyche. I trust the governors and the legislatures to make these decisions. And that they'll develop a health care plan here in Iowa, Governor Branstad, the lieutenant governor, the legislature, that works to keep Iowa healthy and give them access to care. And I believe the people in New Jersey would trust me to do it, and I would even trust the Democratic governors to do the best job they possibly could. It'd be different than what I would do, but then if their people didn't like it, kick them out, which is a lot harder to do in Washington, D.C. So I would replace it with a state-based system where the states made the decisions. The federal government say you need to do it, so you can't take a pass and not do it, but they should come up with the ideas, and then you can have direct input into how this is done and how it works for you, rather than trying to affect what's going on in Washington, D.C., which is, as you know, a tough task. That's the way I'd replace it. Yes, sir, in the back. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Governor. To kind of preface this, I'm going to ask you a question about Veterans Affairs. Start by letting you know I'm a lobbyist. I work for the veterans community in Iowa. Now, the average compensation paid to a totally disabled veteran, a 100% disabled veteran, is $27,400 per year. That's all they get. You walk up to a VA hospital any given day and you're going to see all these disabled vets, their spouses schlepping them around in wheelchairs, and all they get is a sub-poverty income. Now, the average welfare recipient in this country receives $66,300 per year. That's a heck of a lot of money. What would you do as president to reverse that ratio?
Well, I don't know that I would reverse the ratio. I would think that what we need to do is to sit down and have an intelligent conversation about what we need to spend our money on in this country. Right? And so the easiest thing in the world to say, especially to someone who lobbies for the veterans community, is I'd reverse the ratio. I'd give those vets $66,000. I'd give those welfare recipients $27,000. Right? Listen, there's no debate about the fact that veterans have earned everything they get and more. But here's the question. We've got to decide in this country whether or not we are going to continue to increase the size and scope of government, or whether we're going to reapportion what we already spend. I'm not talking about cutting back significantly in what we spend. I would in certain areas. But we've got to reapportion it. We need to spend more on national defense than we do today. Right, and that's part of the Department of Defense. Now, we've got to have an intelligent conversation about how we reapportion these things. And what do we spend on weapon systems? What do we spend on active duty military? What do we spend on our bases and preparedness? And what do we spend on our veterans? My point to you is I'm offended as well by the ratio. But I'm not going to stand here and say to you, and I absolutely will take that ratio up to whatever number you want me to take it up to. But what I will tell you is that I will engage in an honest conversation with the veterans community and the rest of the stakeholders in our defense department to say, how are we compensating veterans compared to what we're spending on everything else and what we're wasting in the Pentagon, which you know that's going on as well. And then let's have that conversation and make those decisions. And that's the right way to do it. And I think most vets would say all they want in the end are two things: a seat at the table to affect the debate and discussion, and fair treatment for the service that they've provided from the taxpayers of the United States of America. And I will tell you as president, I will give them that seat at the table, and I will work as hard as I can to make sure that they believe that they are being compensated fairly for the service that they have given, the disabilities that they have suffered, and the needs of their family. And so let's not do what Barack Obama does. And that's the only reason why I'm quibbling a little bit with you. I don't want to pit one American against another. We don't need to do that. What we need to do is have an intelligent conversation about how to make everybody in America better, how to give everybody a hand up who needs that hand up and who has worked to earn it. Here's what my parents taught me, that the greatest thing about America was if you worked hard enough, you could be anything you wanted in this country. That's the ethic we have to give to those folks who are either temporarily or permanently on welfare, that hard work and a hand up is what this country owes you, nothing else. And our veterans, what they need to hear from us is we're going to honor their service and honor their sacrifice by making sure that they don't have to make the choices that I talked about before, that some folks, if Social Security weren't around, that they have to choose between heat and rent and food. That's a disgrace in this country when a veteran has to do that, and we need to do something to change it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. He's got one behind you.
Thank you, Governor Christie, for allowing us to ask you these questions.
Thank you.
I have a two-part question. Do you believe in when you die that you will face the day of judgment with your Creator? And your answer on that is, what would your answer be to if your Creator asked you, did you do everything you could to protect the weakest and youngest among you?
I absolutely, as a Catholic, believe that I will come at some point when God calls me to the gates and meet St. Peter. And I will be asked about what my life was dedicated and committed to, and did I protect the weakest and the most vulnerable. My answer will be that I believed and my public career matched, as did my private thoughts and feelings, the fact that every life is an individual gift from God, that every life is precious, and that no life is disposable, and that the only person who gets to determine the creation of life and the inevitable evolution of death is God. And that everything that I have done in my life has been to try to make sure that I stood by those principles and those values. And what I'd also say when I got up there, because I'm a politician so I'd want to talk longer, is I'd say, you know, I was pro-life not only for the child that was in the womb, but I was pro-life when that child got out of the womb. I believe it's a lot easier to be pro-life when that life is in the womb. They haven't done anything to disappoint us yet. But when that child comes out of the womb, life becomes difficult and complicated. And people make good choices and bad choices because, unlike the Almighty, we are flawed and we're sinners and we make bad judgments at times. We need to be pro-life as a party and as a people for that 16-year-old drug addict on the floor of the county lockup, and know that that life is just as precious, and not make a moral judgment on how that person got there, but give them the tools through rehabilitation and care and treatment to lift them up and give them a chance to redeem the life that God's given them. And I believe at the end of life, there's no one who should be making the judgment about the end of life other than God. So I don't believe in assisted suicide. I don't believe in those things because I believe God should make those judgments, not human beings here on earth. And the only time we have a right to make that decision is in self-defense. Otherwise, I don't believe we do. So I think there are going to be a lot of things St. Peter will want to go over with me. On your question, I think I'll do just fine. Some of the other questions? Well, on funding of Planned Parenthood, let me tell you this. I'm glad this controversy is happening. I'm glad those videos came out. But this is the difference between folks in Congress and people who have been governors. Folks in Congress will talk about a subcommittee, a bill in a subcommittee to amend the budget, to attach to an amendment. I defunded Planned Parenthood in New Jersey 6 years ago. And I have vetoed Planned Parenthood funding in my budget every year since I've been governor. And so you don't have to wonder what I'll do as president. You just have to look at what I've done as governor. In a state that has 750,000 more Democrats than Republicans, in a state that has a majority Democratic legislature, in a state that by polling is majority pro-choice, I have stood up on the principle I believed in and vetoed Planned Parenthood funding every year for the last 6 years. And every year that veto has been sustained by my Republican colleagues. And so for 6 years, You know what Planned Parenthood's gotten in terms of funding from the New Jersey taxpayers? Zero. And as long as I'm president, that's it, or governor, that's what they'll always get. Yes, sir.
Governor, thanks for coming. My question's about the political process that'll play out in the next year. How do we get the Republican Party to put serious candidates that are willing to deal with issues like you have, very directly? How do we get the shelf space, the focus of the media to serious Republican candidates that can make a difference in the bigger race? And I do like your chances.
Thank you. Here's how you do it. Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. See, the people in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, they care much less about what they see in the national media. They care much less what's on the front page of the New York Times or on MSNBC or on CNN. What they care about is, I talked to somebody today and before I came in here who said, we feel like it's our obligation to meet all the candidates 3 or 4 times. Now imagine that. I can tell you in a state like New Jersey, people will be hoping to get a glimpse of a candidate once between now and Election Day 2016. The way the serious candidates are going to rise to the top is you're going to raise them on your shoulders. You're going to demand they come to Iowa and they answer these questions. You're going to demand that they show up here and they shake your hand and look you in the eye and you get to assess their character. And you're the ones who are going to cull this field down from 16 down to 3 or 4. You're the ones who are going to do it. Not the New York Times, not MSNBC, not CNN. That's not who's going to do it. You're going to do it. And that's why I'm here. Because I want to be one of those 3 or 4 that gets culled out from the 16. And then I want to be standing on the stage in July of next year in Cleveland, accepting the nomination of the party that I've belonged to my entire life. And then I want to be on that stage in late September of 16, taking it to Hillary Clinton on behalf of the American people. And the only way that's going to happen is if you make it happen. That's the way we do it.
Governor Christie, my name is John Olson, and I'm from right here in Ankeny. And I am the father of a son on the autism spectrum. Not only what is your familiarity with the issues surrounding autism, but I know that New Jersey is well regarded in the autism community as providing excellent autism services. Would you make that possible for the rest of the country?
Yes, sir. Here's why in New Jersey, for 2 reasons. One, we have a higher rate of autism in New Jersey than any state in America. It is a near epidemic in my state. And so I deal with families each and every day who are dealing with the challenges, and those challenges differ based upon where an individual is on that entire spectrum. But secondly, it's because this is something that Mary Pat and I care deeply about personally. And we've both been involved, both from a governmental perspective and through a charitable perspective, in working hard to bring attention to the problem of autism, to deal with these young men and women when they age out of the system and they need alternatives, not to be institutionalized, but to live in group homes and to have as fulfilling a life as they have. This is part of what I mean when I talk about pro-life. Our party defines pro-life too narrowly. When we talk about pro-life, we allow the Democrats to put us into a narrow box that all we're talking about is abortion. That's not all I'm talking about. I'm against abortion, and I think it's abhorrent. But here's the thing. I'm pro-life for his child, too. God has created that life as well. And we need, as a society, to say that your child should have the opportunity to develop to his fullest or her fullest God-given potential. And that's what we're doing in New Jersey every day by providing more opportunities for group homes, more funding for the type of services and treatments that are needed for these young men and women, because they're not going away. And they need to feel as a functioning, living part of our society. I don't believe God put anyone on this earth to be mistreated. And in the autism community, there are times and there are places in this country where those children are mistreated. Not in New Jersey. Because my wife and I care deeply about it, and so do the taxpayers of my state. And I will bring that attitude and that approach and that effort by both me and Mary Pat to dealing with families who are dealing with this problem every day. It's heartbreaking. Because when you look at your son or daughter, all you want to know are 2 things. that every bit of potential God's put inside them you can help bring out, and that when you go, you're going to be safe and secure. Those are the two things we need to ensure as a country for people who are suffering from autism and other developmental disabilities. I believe deeply in that, and we'll bring that ethic and that approach to the presidency as well. So, my staff's telling me I can take one more question, which means I will take two. The reason for that is I want to remind them that I am still the boss. Yes, sir, right in the back.
Governor Christie, thanks for coming to Iowa.
Thank you.
Kyrie Fitton, I'm from Mount Pleasant. My question today is about criminal justice reform, and I want to get some of your views, especially in relation to one of the questions that was asked over there, your views on the death penalty, on banning the box, mandatory minimums, and something I know you have experience with as a prosecutor, civil asset forfeiture.
Yep. I have put out a very detailed criminal justice reform plan, because here's the bottom line from my perspective. The reason we're having some of the unrest we're having in places like Baltimore, Ferguson, and other places is because there are large segments of our country who believe that the criminal justice system is not working fairly, that there are disparate sentences depending upon where you live, what your economic background is, what your race or ethnicity is. And that's not the kind of justice system I want in the country that is the fairest and most just country in the world. So I've said a few things. First, the war on drugs is a failure. It's a failure. It was well-intentioned. But let me tell you, everybody, we've been incarcerating people now for 35 years on drug charges, and it's not working. Now, I'm not for someone who's for legalizing drugs. I'm opposed to it. But what I am for is treatment over incarceration for nonviolent offenders. If you're violent, you use a weapon, you're a sociopath, you're dealing drugs, you go to jail, and you go to jail for a very long time. But do you know that over 50% of the prison population in America right now is nonviolent drug offenders? People who had possession, but not enough possession to deal. Well, what happens? Drugs get smuggled into that prison, they remain addicted, they come out addicted, and the recidivism rate nationwide is near 60%. That makes no sense. No sense from a pro-life perspective, and no sense from an economic perspective, since in my state, it costs $49,000 a year to incarcerate someone. You know how much it costs to give them inpatient drug treatment? $24,000 a year. So even if you don't care about giving them rehabilitation, even if you're a CPA like my father and you're counting the numbers make sense. So in New Jersey, we haven't just talked about this like they do in Congress. Talk, 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 talk. We've done it. In New Jersey, if you're now a first-time nonviolent drug offender, you do not go to prison, but you do go to mandatory drug treatment. Now, what's the recidivism rate for people who've gone through drug court like that? 16%. Not 60%, 16%. Imagine what that does for families in this country when they come home and they don't go back to crime, but they're able to be a good mother and father again, a good sister or brother, a good husband or wife. We build a stronger fabric of our society, and we give those people the tools they need to deal with their disease. Drug addiction is a disease. We don't throw people in jail for getting cancer because they smoked. That was a choice too. But we don't say to you, well, you smoked, so you deserve it, so we're not going to treat you. We say, no, we're going to treat you and try to make you better. Just because someone made a bad judgment, and it is a bad judgment, and that's why I don't want to legalize drugs. But just because they made a bad judgment in their life, there's not one person in this room that hasn't made a bad judgment in their lives. But for the grace of God, go I. And on the other parts of criminal justice reform, I really believe that we've got to make sentencing consistent. There shouldn't be a disparate thing between crack cocaine and powdered cocaine. Those kind of things just create more inequity. And we have 25% of the world's prison population in America. It's not right. In New Jersey now, our prison population is down 31% by doing the things we've done on drug rehabilitation. We're going to be in a position next year, I think, to close a state prison. Think about that. Where do you hear any place else in the country that someone's closing a prison, not building a new one? That's the kind of approach I want to take on criminal justice. But let me also be clear. For those violent offenders who commit violent acts, they need to go to prison. They need to go to prison for a long time. We cannot tolerate violence in our streets and our neighborhoods. On civil asset forfeiture and asset forfeiture, I did it as a U.S. attorney. It needs to be done very selectively and very carefully. should not just be a tool of the government, another way of punishing you outside the judicial system. And so we need to do it, especially with drug dealers who are profiting mightily from poisoning our people, but we got to be judicious and careful about it. I would put drug court in every federal court in America. If we did that, we would lower recidivism rates in this country and give people treatment. Because as I said, that life is precious too. And you know, all of us know who have children that our children are one bad decision away from being an addict. One bad decision away. And would our children then, would their life be less precious to us because they made a bad decision? Would we want society to turn their back on our child? Well, as President of the United States, every one of the children in America is my child. And I need to bring that ethic to it. You had something you want to follow up on. Death penalty. I'm for the death penalty. I am pro-life. But what I said, if you listen to the answer, was the only place I think human beings have in taking life is self-defense. And that's why I believe that people have the right to defend themselves, and I think society has the right to defend themselves. And so if someone takes a life, I believe society has the right in self-defense to make sure they do not kill again to take that life. Now, this is a very controversial issue, and people of very good will can have differences of opinion on the death penalty. I don't agree with my church on this issue. The Catholic Church does not believe in the death penalty. But as a public official, I believe that people have the right and society has the right to defend themselves, and that's why I favor the death penalty. But I understand it's a controversial decision, and I do not look down on someone who disagrees with me on that, but you have the right to know what I think, and that's what I think about the issue. All right, last question. I can go over here.
Iowa, but I had the opportunity recently to spend 13 years in Newark, Delaware.
Newark, Delaware.
Not to be confused with Newark.
Not to be confused. Newark,
Go
Delaware,
Blue Hens.
where I spent 4 years of my life and met my wife at the University of Delaware, so I'm familiar.
You know they love you. They think of you as a native son. My question is, what experience can you point to in your life and career that has really shaped you and shaped your views more than anything?
I'll give you two answers to it. One's professional, one's personal. On the professional side, nothing has shaped my life professionally more than Hurricane Sandy. The second worst natural disaster in the history of this country, only behind Hurricane Katrina. When I woke up the morning of October 30th, the day after the hurricane, my state had 365,000 homes destroyed. We had no operational water treatment or wastewater treatment plants. 75% of the state was without power. We had about 51 gas stations operational in the entire state. Every school was closed. Most of our major highways were impassable, including the New Jersey Turnpike. And people were scared. And when you get that entire briefing that morning, you're the governor sitting around. After they give you the briefing, everybody stops and keeps quiet and looks at you and says, now what do we do? Nothing could be more formative as a leader than that moment when the 8.9 million people in your state are looking at you and saying, Governor, save us, help us, get our lives back to normal. And everything I've done in the last 2.5 years since Hurricane Sandy and everything I did from that day forward was to fulfill my oath to the people of my state, to be their governor, and to understand that in a crisis, there's only one leader. The governor, the president, is the leader. And you need to set the direction and work hard and set the tone. But you also need to go out to your people and you need to hug them. And you need to listen to them. And they need to know that you won't forget them. And there's nothing that's formed my philosophy of leadership more than that moment. Lots of other things have influenced it. Personally, what I would tell you in terms of in my background, what's formed me, is what I'll tell you as I end today, since you're the last question. We all are a product of our parents, right? I've mentioned my dad a couple of times this morning. He's 82 years old and retired. I'm the product of an Irish father and a Sicilian mother. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this dynamic, what that means is that as the oldest son in that deal, I became expert at dispute resolution very early on. I don't want to say that it would be disrespectful for me to say that my mother was argumentative, But let me just say this way. She never saw an argument that she didn't think was worth having. And that was the rule she set in our house, right? The rule my mom set in the house was no suffering in silence. If you've got a problem, I want to hear it. You got a grievance, put it on the table. You got an idea, lay it out there. But if you tell me, oh, I was thinking about this, but I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to bother you, I have no sympathy for you. I want to hear it. Now, I think she did this because she was the #1 purveyor of this philosophy. We heard every grievance of hers that you could imagine, of everything that we did or did not do, from clearing the table or washing the dishes to our grades at school to talking back, everything and everything in between. And when she would do this, when we got older, we would say, Mom, stop, enough, we've heard it, all right. And she'd say, no, you need to hear this now. I need to get it off my chest. There'll be no deathbed confessions in this family, Christopher. You're going to hear it now. That's the way my mother taught us to be. And that's the way I've lived my life. And I said I had a Sicilian mother because we lost my mom 11 years ago. And my mom was one of those people, when I was answering your question, my mom was a lifetime smoker. And on Valentine's Day 2004, she was diagnosed with lung cancer. And for any of you who've gone through this with a family member or a friend, you know that that disease can be very aggressive or it can take a long time. With my mom, it was very aggressive. And so I was U.S. Attorney at the time, and I was at the U.S. Attorney's National Conference in San Diego. My younger brother called me and said, listen, Mom's taking a real turn for the worse. We had to put her back in the hospital. And the doctors are saying, if you want to see her, you need to come home now. So I took a red-eye flight home from San Diego, arrived in Newark in the morning at the airport, got my car, drove to the hospital. When I got there, they had started to give her morphine. For those of you who've gone through this, you know that's right at the end. They're trying to manage her pain. And so she was kind of in and out of things. So I sat by the bed for a while waiting for her to wake up. When she woke up, it was typical of my mother, right? I mean, she hadn't seen me for a week. It wasn't, hello, how are you? How was your week? She said, what day is it? I said, well, good morning, Mom. Good to see you. I'm doing fine, and it's Friday. She said, what time is it? I said, it's 9:30 in the morning. She said, go to work. I said, Mom, I came home from San Diego. I took a flight overnight to see you. I want to spend the day with you. I don't have to go to work today. Don't worry about it. She said to me, Christopher, it is a work day. Go to work. I said, are you afraid of not getting your taxpayers' money's worth? What's going on? I'll make up the time. Don't worry, I'm staying with you today. My mom reached over, she grabbed my hand, and she said to me, Christopher, go to work. It's where you belong. There is nothing left unsaid between us. It was, outside the birth of our children, the single most powerful moment of my life. My mother was giving me permission to let her go. She knew she was dying. And the reason it was so powerful was I realized at that moment definitively that what she had taught us was right. See, there were no words left unsaid. Every grievance had been laid out on the table. Every complaint was out there. And by the way, just as importantly, I knew how much she loved me. And she knew how much I loved her. And so I did what I was told. I got up, I kissed her on the forehead, I said goodbye to her, and I went to work. And that afternoon, she went into a coma, and 3 days later, she died. It was the last conversation we ever had, and I have no regrets. And the reason I tell you it's a formative moment for me is because as one of the most psychoanalyzed politicians in America, right? When I tell people to get the hell off the beach, they're like, why did he say that? Why did he do that? When I tell somebody, sit down and shut up, why did he do that? It's her. That's why. It's her. And you need to know, and it's why it's such a good question. You go to my website, see every one of those proposals I've made. But that's not the whole story. You need to know who you're voting for, who the person is, because you're not going to be able to anticipate every problem that comes across my desk as president. You're going to need to trust that you have the right person sitting there when the new thing comes up, the unexpected thing, the Hurricane Sandy, that you have somebody who's going to know how to lead, not be afraid to make decisions, and to tell you the truth. I'll do that because that's the way I was raised. And I know if my mom were still here today to see this circus that my life has become, she'd say lots of things, but I know there'd be two things she'd tell me for sure. First is she'd say, so you're running for President of the United States. You're a real big shot. Remember something, buddy. I know who you are. I changed your diapers. I know you. Keep your head on your shoulders. Keep your feet on the ground. She'd want me to continue to be myself. And second, what she'd say to me is, if you're really going to ask these people to give you the greatest trust they can give to anybody outside their family, and that is to give you their vote for President of the United States, then you better tell them everything you're thinking and everything you're feeling, because that's what we do in a trusting relationship. So I'm not only doing this because this is the way I've been raised and trained and who I am, I'm also doing it in the context of this campaign as my tribute to her. This is the way she would demand I would do it if she were here, and I'm not going to do it any differently because God's now taken her. And so, for me, I can make you lots of different promises about issues, and I will. But here are the 4 promises that you're going to be able to absolutely take to the bank because they're all within my control. You'll never have to wonder what I'm thinking. You'll never have to wonder what I'm feeling. You'll never have to wonder what I'm willing to fight for. And you'll never have to wonder how hard I'm willing to fight for it. And if I do those 4 things as your president, we'll figure the rest of it out. We don't have that now. We need it. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Governor Christie, for being here today. And thank you. On behalf of Des Moines Area Community College, I'd like to present you with the DMAC Automotive hat. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.